Hello, BookTube. All right, well, I'm sure that you can tell, even at that end of the camera, that I'm encountering massive technological problems here, and we're going to try and keep doing this. We're going to try and keep doing this. I'm going to try and get through these questions. I don't know how many videos it will take now. My phone keeps malfunctioning, so we'll give it a try. So I got a few questions answered last time, then the phone shut off. So we're going to try this again. I think probably by my estimation, I have 3 more such problems in me, and then we'll skip questions until 7,000. But there are plenty of other videos we can make in the meantime. So I had just done, when I was interrupted, I had just finished John Ball's questions about Quartet of Authors. So we'll move on from there. Tomorrow's classic says, what is the best Saul Bellow novel? And that would depend on what is the shortest Saul Bellow novel. Rashmika Likes Books says, who is your favorite South African writer? And I know it's predictable, but it'd probably be Nadine Gordimer. Although I really like the thrillers of Dion Meyer. I really do. I don't think he's ever written one that I haven't liked. So it depends on which end of the serious spectrum you were on. Uh, uh, Thrift Bookish, I think. I can't read my own writing. Says, thoughts on Anne Rice's writing and books. Well, her writing is terrible, but I really like her books. Her books are really enjoyable, the ones that hit. She has some misses, some very pronounced misses. Her trilogy on Jesus Christ, for instance, is, you'll pardon the phrase, god awful. But some of her books I just love as candy. Uh, let's see here. Wilson Shugart asks, what was your favorite thing about life at sea? Have I ever written fiction about life at sea? My favorite thing about it was the unrelenting beauty. Even storms that mean to kill you are beautiful in their way, and every other thing is too. Uh, and also, I mean, not the storms, of course, but other than that, the downtime. I've spent a great deal of time uh, in crafts alone with my dogs, just me, just a single sheet, so it was just me, and that gives you infinite amounts of time, really, alone if the weather's good. I spent a lot of time like that, for instance, off the Florida Keys, where in the right season you can spend day after day after day with nothing around you but turquoise and clouds, and that's really nice. And as far as writing fiction about life at sea, the closest that I've ever come is there's rather extensive periods of dramatizing life at sea in my novel Steve Donohue's Ulysses, which is the second volume in a trilogy of novels that I wrote adapting Homeric era myth. And that rather than the Odyssey, for instance, doesn't spend a lot of time at sea. It mainly about landfalls, but I wanted to increase the amount of time at sea, so there's quite a bit there in Steve Donohue's Ulysses. Uh, Tomorrow's classic asks again, what are your thoughts on William Horwood or on animal fantasy in general? And I've read all of the William Horwood novels, all those Wood novels, and I like them. Kind of. I think my answer to animal fiction is going to be fairly predictable, which is that I don't see the point of it most of the time. Almost, in fact, all of the time. The writers are anthropomorphizing the animals in ways that are weird if you have spent time with the animals, with the actual animals. No one ever writes a pig the way a pig thinks. No one ever writes a badger the way a badger thinks. Uh, and so on down the line. Don't even get me started about dogs. They are popular, from Knopp's trials to the plague dogs, and they're mystifying to me. Mystifying. So far off the mark that I often find myself wondering, why don't you just have these people, be humans? If this is what you're going to do, why bother to write them as animals? And yet there are exceptions. There are animal stories that I really love, even though they are wide off the mark. Like, for instance, Rudyard Kipling's Jungle Books, I think, are great. I know them practically by heart. And also the Book of Merlin by T.H. White, in which a very old King Arthur has a council about the worth of humanity. And one of those council members is Merlin, the old magician, but all the other council members are animals. And T.H. White doesn't try really to do much with that. He doesn't try to make them animals. They're just different kinds of people. And yet I loved it, of course. Book of Merlin is one of my favorite books. So I don't go seeking out animal fiction, but there have been examples that I've liked. Let's see here. Nanette McCall says, has there ever been a good biography of Eva Perón? Well, I have only read English language biographies of Eva Perón. I can imagine that there are much better works that have never been translated. But I did jot down Alicia Duchovny Ortiz. Alicia Ortiz wrote one that I remember liking, but I don't know how long ago it was. Probably decades ago that I read it. Randall Krelkelberg says, what is the hardest review you've ever had to write, and why? What types of books take the most time to review? The hardest reviews that I've ever had to write are two categories. One is when I'm reviewing posthumous work by an author I loved, which the last thing, it was at the publisher, they're dead, and I'm writing a review, but there's no longer a sense of an active conversation. There's no longer a sense that they're going to read it. And that can be very sad when it's an author that I've liked, or in a couple of cases, an author that I've known. And in terms of what takes the most time to review, for me, hands down, that would be a complicated novel. And not for the complications, not for the depth and the wisdom and the chin-stroking, literary fiction hijinks, but because complicated novels mean you've got to get things right. you've got to. I already, if somebody writes about, the Battle of Tripoli, I already know that. I already know that subject, so I can dig in and find out other things to talk about, things that I want to point out, strengths and weaknesses. But in a complex novel, so-and-so's cousin's stepbrother, you've got to know everything about him in order to mention him in your review, because you get it wrong, you're going to hear about it. So I'm not often asked to review long, complex novels, and thank God, and I don't often do it myself. I read them all. But reviewing them is the devil's own mischief, because you've got to get all the details right. So those are the ones that take the most time to do. In terms of hard to review, another thing that's very hard to do is when you have a really complex book, a work of nonfiction, and you've only got 800 words. That is brutal. That is absolutely brutal. But I managed to do it, but it's tough. Even after all this time, I still find it tough. Then let's see here. Ryan Reed says, your favorite Elizabethan sonnet sequence. Afraid I don't have a favorite. Then, I don't think this is supposed to be pronounced, PRCZEKO2 says, who are your favorite painters? And they're the usual suspects. I've mentioned them before on this channel: Sir Edward Landseer, Sir Lawrence, or John Singer Sargent, John Singleton Copley, people like that. people where you can look at the painting and see what it is and tell what it is immediately. I like that. And I like a lot of, for instance, early 20th century French painters before Futurism and Mannerism and all the postmodern garbage that came out, when people were doing historical paintings, stuff like that. A lot of that I really, really like. I could go on at great length when we walk through an art museum, but we would have the wing all to ourselves, because everybody would be next door looking at the paintings, at the canvases covered in random blotches of paint, and saying, how profound. Generally speaking, if you can look at a painting from 100 years ago, 150 years ago, see immediately what it is and say, boy, that's really well done, I couldn't in a million years do that myself, that tends to be a painting that I like. Do I ever visit exhibitions? No. I can't stand crowds. I really can't. I will put up with them if I have to, but I'm not going to voluntarily subject myself to something like that. If a friend asked me to, like, for instance, John Singer Sargent, the MFA here in Boston, had a Sargent exhibit that was so successful that they actually had visiting hours around the clock. So you could go at 3 a.m. and bring a pillow and wander around the place when it's pitch dark and outside and quiet as a mouse. And I wasn't going to miss that. And I had friends that wanted to go with me. But other than that, no. Big exhibits, no. And favorite museum or gallery? My favorite museum anywhere in the world is the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum right here in Boston. Afraid to say, I know that's a little predictable on my part, but nevertheless, if you haven't seen it, you really ought to. Next time you come to Boston, put it high on the list. Let's see here. Alec with Love says, have I ever owned a cat? No, I have not ever owned a cat. Derek Green says, favorite book or books under 150 pages? There are quite a few. I know that on this channel I show a great penchant for very long novels, but I like them at all lengths, depending on what they are. The one that came to mind, a novel by Brendan McClafferty called Cal, which is, it's old. I think it was made into a movie as well, but I think it's probably still in print, and it is very good. I very much like it. I reread it years after I read it the first time, just to see if it would hold up, and it does. Someone named Carlos says, have I ever read any of the books written by Morrissey, and what do I think of his music? And I don't understand Morrissey as a cultural phenomenon. I really don't. People talking about him as if they were living in the time of Jesus, and that's who they're talking about, and I don't get it. I've read I think one of the books. I've listened to the music, and I whatever he's doing for his fans, realigning their entire life, it's not happening to me. So I don't know. Maybe if it's something later on in life that I'll just have to come to, but as it is, no. Let's see here. And then we get to the end of page 3, but it took us a long effort to get here. Let's see. Acirema, ACIREMA 1000. What was your first ever Penguin classic? And that was E.V. Ryu's translation of Homer's Odyssey, which I didn't think I was going to like at all. I didn't know what to make of it, and I really liked it. I still do. I think it holds up really well as a translation of the Odyssey. And that's it. That is page 3. I'm going to wrap this video up, and then we'll make a new video and try and power through right to the end of this, provided my technology behaves. So sorry, this was not meant to be many videos. I will wrap this up, and we'll be right back. Thank you, BookTube.